Hello, fellow writers. I'm Lewis. That over there is Tolkien, and we have a special guest, but you have found the Scripturient Society. There are three of us here this time.
Woohoo! Welcome back, writers, readers who just popped in here, fans of our guests who I'm sure have just showed up to say hello. Today we have special guests. Oh, wait, I guess I'll say, did I say who I am? I'm Ash O'Rourke, aka Tolkien. That over there is Karissa Harlow, aka Catherine, aka Lewis, and our guest who just has a normal standard name. You guys are all welcome for that. Just stand a much better chance at remembering it. Is Mary Adkins. So, Mary, do you want to say hello and tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mary. Yeah, I wish I had a more fun name. I'm Mary Adkins. And I was just trying to think of a fun name for myself, but I'm not. I'll let it go.
Pick someone from the Inklings. That's what we do. That's what Kendall did. And I don't know any of the others though. All I know is Owen Barfield's.
Owen Barfield. It's like your brain goes blank of like literary characters when you're.
I've never read a book in my life.
I'm a fraud.
Once I was doing an interview and someone asked me like my favorite story from anything, and I was like, I couldn't think of a single story. I was like, I don't think I've ever heard or read or watched a single story because I just can't think of
entire life. What is a story?
It was too broad of a term or something.
It's a very broad question.
It was too broad, so I shut down. So I'm a novelist. I have published 3 novels. They are like contemporary adult fiction. I live in Nashville. So I don't live in Nashville. I got to stop saying that. I just moved. I just moved and I'm not used to it. It's like when you write your old zip code and realize you've moved. I live in Dallas actually now. We just moved a month ago. Yeah. So we're Texans now. I know. Everybody here has Texas, or at least Ash, you and I do.
Ash does. I'm Arizona. So I'm the lone Arizonan.
Right. So I am in Dallas, and I have a 5-year-old son named Finn, and he might barge in here at some point. We'll see.
So cool. Ash's cat children often interrupt, or dog children.
All the time. It's constant. I apologize in advance. I also apologize again. There will be a kind of subtle going on in the background of my audio this whole time because it's still well over 100 degrees and I just can't turn off the AC. I'll never get it cold again. So, or even cool. I am still sweating inside, but I'm like surviving. So I'm sorry, but y'all are all just gonna have to deal with the background AC. I turned off the fan. I'm trying.
Yeah, you got it. You have to do what you have to do.
Oh yeah.
And I teach writers to finish their novels. So I'm a novel writing coach. I started a program a couple of years ago called the BOOK Incubator, and it's like a 12-month program. So I run that, and that's virtual. That's all online. And so when I'm not writing or being a mom, that's what I'm doing usually. Or unpacking boxes lately, but hopefully that will end soon.
Yeah. Up until that last one, I'm like, that sounds like the perfect life. So
see, I'm like, that just sounds like the perfect life. I love boxes included. Boxes.
You do? Oh my god, I do. There's like 2 kinds of people: the people who love it and the people who hate it.
Well, Chris and I were in college together, and I used to volunteer to pack her stuff at the end of the school year. It
was very nice.
People's stuff. I was like, I just love it.
You.
It was awesome for me, for sure. I guess it was awesome for Ash too. No losers in that situation.
Everyone. It was win-win-win.
Everyone won.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Let's see. I know that all of our writers out there are going to just, groan with dismay, but we're just going to skip our usual weekly updates. I know that that's not something you guys all fast forward through anyways. You would never. But you don't even have to. If that was what your plan was, don't even worry about it because we're just going to go straight into book recs from here. As we have all read at least one book in our lives, I would assume to bring us to this point.
If we can remember.
If we can remember.
If we can remember anything we've ever read.
Ever. We'll offer book recs, and Karissa is always on a roll. So Karissa, we'll start with you. Have you any book recs?
I do. I'm so happy. I went through such a stint where I had no book recs, but I do now. So I've been reading the Dark Artifices series by Cassandra Clare. So I read Lady Midnight and Lord of Shadows. And I have many thoughts about Lady Midnight. So I'm going to do a Catherine's Corner episode on that one. So I'm not going to talk about it too much.
That's going to be interesting.
Because I feel like I have insulted it in the past. And I stand by it, but also I stand corrected on some points. So that'll be fun.
Very curious.
So I'm in the middle of Queen of Air and Darkness, which is the third, and I believe it's just a 3-book series. So it's 800 plus pages long.
Right. I was like, that's the
So-
Oh,
long one,
wow.
right?
It's super
Oh,
long.
wow.
Yeah.
No,
So
thanks.
it's been taking even me a couple days. Normally I try to finish books within 1 to 2 days, but for this one, especially because it's the last book, I'm like, okay, I want to take it in. I don't want to rush through it just to like say that I read an
Mhm.
800-page book. And it's
Yeah.
pretty good. There are some things I don't, Cassandra Clare's romances are so like hit or miss for me. Like I either love them and I'm so invested, or I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever read. So there's a mixture of that going on. But otherwise I really like them. So I would highly recommend. Although you have to read the Mortal Instruments series first. Definitely do not try to read it as your introduction to Cassandra Clare. That's my only stipulation.
Gotcha. But
But
so
yeah.
mostly a book rec.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do enjoy that. I don't mean to make it sound like I don't enjoy them. I do. I really like Cassandra Clare. It's just I hold her to like this different standard because I like so much of what she does. So I feel like I have to even it out
That's
with
fair.
a little bit of criticism, which is probably not necessary, but
Well,
that's what
it's
I'm like.
also
So,
just that's what you're like as a reader too. You never
Yeah.
like go in for full enjoyment. You're always like analyzing stuff too. That's just
True.
how you've always been as long as I've known you.
yeah.
Huh.
It's a burden and a gift. I don't know.
It is.
Well,
Yeah.
then when you really like something, I feel like you appreciate it so much more.
Exactly.
And also your recommendations carry even more weight. 'cause
I
it's
hope
like,
so.
Oh yeah.
That's the
Carissa's
goal.
book
Yeah.
recs definitely carry weight. I'm like, it was good. I don't know. Like I'm so much less like structured about it.
yeah,
Yeah. But Mary, do you have any book recs you want to share?
I do. I've been recommending this just one novel that it's pretty popular right now. So I'm like definitely just one of millions of people who are saying this, but I've been recommending it to people all summer because I loved it so much. It's called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle
Ah.
Zevin. Have you
Mhm.
read
I've heard
it?
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about it.
It's big. It's a long one. I forget how many pages, but not 800, but maybe like 500. But it's about video game designers. And I'm not a gamer. And it was like really fun reading about a world that I don't know anything about. And like still getting really into it. Like I had so many opinions about these video games. And so she did such a good job of educating, like, I don't even know how much was fiction and how much wasn't of like how the video game creation world and industry works. But it was really, really fun to read. And I just loved it. I loved the characters. It was so much fun. And I want to read it again, which is not something I usually feel about a book. Like as soon as I finish it, I want to read it again.
Yeah.
I don't even remember the last time I felt that way. So that's definitely unusual for me.
High praise.
Yeah, the last book
Good
that
stuff.
I felt that way about was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which I'm trying so hard to get Karissa to read because
it's literally behind me.
because you are so analytical and I'm like, I think the craft is exquisite in this book. I want to see if you can pick it apart, and find anything to be upset with about it. I have a hard time because I was it's so masterfully done, and you refuse to read it. But that was how I felt.
I'm gonna read it now. I'm gonna read it as soon as we get off.
Good. Yes,
because I love when I feel like a book is like masterfully crafted. That's like my favorite, right? That's so fun.
Geek.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this book, and it was so funny too because it's not a genre I would usually pick up, but we did it and we covered it on our sister podcast, That Pretentious Book Club. And I mean, hopefully I raved enough in that episode about it, but I haven't stopped raving since, and that was like,
It's true.
I don't know, a year or 2 years ago.
You bring it up
a long time ago.
Every other episode, I think.
I do bring it up a lot.
Oh my gosh, why haven't you read it yet, Chris?
I think my
read.
expectations are so high that I want to be able to
Mm.
really invest in it and sit down and do it. And I was in like a terrible reading slump for the beginning of this year. I mean, I read like 2 books in 6 months, which is not normal for me. So now I'm back into it. So I should have it read by next time. We'll see. But
yeah, she's one of those like 100+ books a year readers on average, which is mind-boggling.
One of those.
She's one of those.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah, it is. I'm very impressed.
Well, I am gonna finally break with my trend of not having any new book recs for everybody. I have 2. One of them is a strong recommendation. One of them is This is just where I tell you guys, I just try to prove to everybody that I
Enthusiastic.
actually do know how to read. I mean, I don't know that I would recommend it.
Here's a story
I'll
that
put it this way.
exists.
I gave it 3
Yeah.
stars. I think it was written fine. I don't know if I have a problem with the writing in one of these or if I just didn't like the content. Like I just genuinely can't tell. But I didn't hate it. I've been listening to audiobooks, which is not my favorite. I do prefer to read actual books, but for multitasking purposes, I got a deal on these 3 thrillers because I've been really into thrillers lately, which is new for me, relatively speaking. So they're all by the author Chevy Stevens, who so far I've only found thrillers. So I think this author pretty much only writes thrillers, which is usually fine by me. I will start with my 3-star recommendation, which is called Those Girls. And let me just say, if you want to talk trauma, hint, hint, that might be what we're talking about later. This book is extraordinarily traumatic and graphic, and all the trigger warnings, if anyone is going to read this book. And so I don't know if I don't love graphic trauma in books. I feel that to me, sometimes it just feels like the author's trying to get a reaction. But at the same time, I'm like, maybe the author's processing through something. Like, it's not really something you can judge, but I can say I personally don't enjoy it.
Yeah,
It was
fair
so
enough.
graphic. And then also so far, all 3 of these, because I'm on my 3rd Chevy Stevens book at the moment. Which I think might be my favorite one so far, actually. But they all do this like split perspective thing where they're like half the stories told in the past and half the stories told in the present. But it's like far in the past. Like it's like this is when we were kids and now we're like 38 and have our own kids. And it's like kind of like solving mysteries and unanswered questions about these horrible traumatic things that happened and like bringing people to justice and the wrong people get blamed. And so it's very, very interesting. I think I would maybe I would have given that one a higher rating if just the trauma was less graphic. But that one was called Those Girls. So if you guys are okay with that, maybe you would enjoy that. It was a good thriller. Also, they spent so much time and I guess this is my bad. I didn't realize like reading the back of the book thing that or in this case the summary thing, that it was about like these girls as teenagers was like 50 or 60% of the book as like young teenagers. I thought it was going to be like mostly adults because these are adult thrillers. And so I wasn't expecting. It's also so much more horrible when these traumatic things are happening to like
to a child,
to children. And I was not expecting it. And so I don't know if that was what it was, but just lots of warnings. And if you guys go into it with that, I think that maybe everyone will enjoy it more. If you like the books that are kind of set half in past, half in present. I don't super, to be honest. I like a few flashbacks. This felt like a lot. This felt like a 60-40 split. Not my vibe. But I am happy to recommend the second book much more strongly, which is called That Night by Chevy Stevens. It still does some of the back and forth, but they're like 20 years old in the past. And in the present, it's like 15 years later. And I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying the whole concept is like they were wrongly accused of this murder that happened. And so they're, out on probation or whatever, or on parole or something. And they're trying to find the real killer. And it's a whole thing. And so it's much, much more interesting. There's still some trauma, not the same type. Definitely not the same type and not as graphic and not as intense. And this is happening to 20-year-olds versus I think they were like 15, 16 and 19 or something. Yeah. So and the main character was the 15-year-old in the other one. So very young. Much more recommendations for That Night by Chevy Stevens. It's a great thriller. If you got cold cases, that kind of thing, but you're like, but I want fiction. Highly recommend. It was really good. These are like the opposite. Y'all both picked like long books to rec. These are audiobooks, so I can't say for certain, but they were pretty short, even as audiobooks. So these are not long. But they're fun. They're good. I wouldn't be like 5 stars all around, but I would give that last one like 4. So like it's definitely a decent read, definitely worth it. And Chirp Audiobooks has these on sale all the time. So that's where I get a lot of my audiobooks, is because they'll do thriller sales. And it'll be like, just for today, $2.99 for this $30 audiobook. And I was like, yes,
jump on that.
That's great. Yeah,
exactly.
That's really good.
It is. And that's how I got
that
this.
Sounds like a good
bundle.
weekend read.
Yes.
Yeah.
they're good. They're good weekend reads. They're good if you're multitasking kind of, and like, and you're like, I don't want to listen to any more true crime podcasts because it's just so sad.
Yeah.
It's
too real.
It's too real. It's like, I like the suspense, but I don't. So that's why I do a lot of scam podcasts, because at least then people are getting duped, but not killed. Like, I don't know, like the stakes seem less, but it's still kind of exciting.
Exactly.
But this, that one sounds great. That Night, it's called.
Yeah, That Night by Chevy Stevens. And then I'll preemptively, because I got these all in a bundle, I'll just go ahead and tell you guys about them in a bundle. I am currently reading another one by Chevy Stevens, and it's called Never Let You Go. And it touches on a lot of my own personal trauma, which feels like giving you guys a lot of information about myself if you do ever read this book. So and for that, I'm very wary right now, because I'm like, wait, I don't want to re-traumatize myself reading this. But it's so far, I think, written the best of the three. So we'll see. I'll give a full book rec on it when I actually finish it. But gotta love the Chirp audiobook bundles, because that's why I got these.
Yeah, that's
Anyways.
amazing.
Yeah. So those are my book recs, which are always just more like, this is what Ash is doing. Look, she does know how to read.
Gotta prove yourself every once in a while.
I do feel like I have to sometimes. Especially compared to you, like 100 books a year. Like, look, I read a book.
You seemed really good at the beginning of the year, when I was like 17 weeks straight of like, nothing, guys, I haven't read a single page. And you're like, I've read things.
I was every other week. I was like, I've read things. It's so funny. But anyways, do you want to share our word of the week, Karissa?
Yes. Our word of the week is Folderol. 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 And it is a trivial or nonsensical fuss, or a showy but useless item or trinket. So you can like raise a folderol about something that's nonsense, or it can be like just like an object. It doesn't really matter.
My first thought was, I was gonna say, oh, like my husband, because I like to joke that he's my trophy husband. Obviously not true. But
he's such a folderol.
The best thing
even
about
more
waking
degrading
up
than
is
trophy husband.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's make this worse.
That's my folderol. Actually, I lied. That was the second thing that came to mind. The first thing that came to mind was, the best part about waking up is folderol in your cup instead of
I did also think of Folgers.
Right?
Yeah.
I just can't think of a lot of words that start with FOL.
Yeah.
Folderol.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Folderol.
Folder. But yeah, folderol.
I like that.
I can't think of any.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm thinking like,
that's a really fun word.
The word trinket in the definition makes me think of like a locket, which is, I don't know why, but like lockets are kind of important. So I feel like that would not be folderol.
Classy. Maybe like, like the pencil toppers that are covered in feathers, and they're not even an eraser. They're just the feather topper. I don't know.
That would be one.
That would be a folderol.
I like that.
I think so.
Or we could
it's like making a big deal out of nothing. Like making a big deal out of something
making
small.
a fuss. Yeah.
Sort of like I've always loved the expression, a tempest in a teacup. I mean, this is a little different, but it's a little bit like that, where it's like, like this feels like something not everybody cares about. Like people care about this.
You're throwing a fit, but like, I don't know how to react because I don't see why it's important.
It's about absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Yes. See, how can I mess up this word? And also still somewhat use it in context. My folderol of a husband loves to folderize over the most meaningless things.
There you go.
Look at that. I did it wrong 2 ways.
Part of
and
speech
I'm so
change.
proud of myself. That's what I contribute.
You started out and I was like, Ash, you're just using the word right.
I know. Well, and I didn't like it. Every time I use the one of the word of the weeks correctly, I'm like, ooh, it didn't feel good. I need to mess this up. So I'm
gonna be incorrect. Oh my gosh. I feel the opposite. Whenever you say that wrong, I'm like, cringe.
I know. I do it wrong for the same reason that I sometimes wink at you, because you have the same reaction where you hate it so much.
It's just like poking.
Yeah. I'm just like,
It wouldn't be as fun with somebody else. Like if I was doing this like with Kendall, she would just be like, like with my host over the other podcast, she wouldn't even phase her remotely. So I would just be like, all that effort to do it wrong and I got no reaction.
Yeah. My family and I were playing a game a couple weeks ago and people had to write down answers, and I couldn't help myself. I kept correcting their spelling. Like someone spelled independent with an A, like A-N-T, and I was like, I just want everyone to know that this is spelled wrong. So maybe that'll help you figure out who wrote it.
You're like,
like,
who
I'm
here's
sorry.
the idiot?
I'm so obnoxious, but I can't, like, my brain needs to correct it. So
That is so funny, but not bad for an editor.
yeah, it's true.
No, good skill to have.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely useful. So I guess we can get into our theme for this episode, which I'm like super excited about. This was one that I think was suggested over email. I had never thought about this before. I mean, I had personally, but I'd never thought about doing it as a topic for an episode. And the idea is how to let your like personal trauma that you've experienced inform your writing without re-traumatizing yourself. And that is definitely a struggle I think a lot of us have. I think because trauma is so private to so many people, you know, it's just considered so personal that we don't really talk about that. It definitely never occurred to me to talk about it on the pod, but I think it's extremely important, especially considering that writing is, I mean, that's how so many of us process our trauma. So of course, trauma informs our writing, but there's definitely a line there somewhere where you don't want to just, you know, like dwell on it. You don't want to get so it back that you put yourself back into it, you know, so into it like we get with our writing sometimes. So this is something that I think Mary has a good handle on, or at least better than we do. So we wanted her to come on and talk to us about it. So I don't know if you want to just give us how you feel about that and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I would love to. And then I'd love to hear what you all think too. I think so one reason I really like talking about this now is that like I said, I'm mainly a novelist. I mainly write fiction. So I published 3 novels and I did draw on trauma, I would say, for a couple of scenes in those, but like in a really minimal way. So I had done it, but I'd never really, like you said, put conscious thought to what that process was like or how I did that. I just kind of did it. And it was one part of the whole writing process.
Right.
But then in the last year or two, I've been working on a memoir about a year of my life that was especially traumatic, which was pregnancy loss. I had a few pregnancy losses, and the memoir is about that trauma. So like a very different experience of like returning to this kind of like scene of the crime, so to speak, like over and over again.
Not a subplot.
Yeah. It's the point. And like, so I discovered some things doing that I really like. I became really interested in this, basically talking to people about this and how to do this. And like, so there are lots of things I want to say, but I guess I'll kind of start here. I have found that so when you're writing about trauma, there's like thinking about yourself as the writer and taking care of you, and also thinking about your future reader and taking care of them. And they're different things, and they are overlapping though. But they are different. So like, as you were saying a second ago, and I feel the same way as a reader, like I don't love graphic trauma in books. I will actually, like, if it starts to get too graphic, I will start skimming or just straight skip over it. Like, I don't need that. I'm like, nope, I can't. So, and I also get really frustrated as a reader if I do not feel like I got a heads up that this was coming. Like,
yes.
Right. Where it's like I was really frustrated about this in Lessons in Chemistry, because everyone's raving about this book. I think it's going to be this light romantic romp that I'm going to read at the beach. And then on page like 18, I'm reading a rape. I was like, I was so
I would not
frustrated
expect
because I
that
was
the way
like,
people talk about it.
Needed a heads up about this. Like, this is not what I thought I was just signing up for. Like, I was actually angry. Like, I put the book down. It's like, I'm going to read something else this morning because I'm so mad.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think there's a kind of, like, we could talk about ways of doing that are like, I think that's a form of taking care of your reader, like giving your reader a heads up about what might be coming, giving your reader some breaks, some reprieve. I think, okay, so then to go back to taking care of your writer self, I've found that like I have to come back and do it in sort of passes. So like on a first pass, it's really raw, and it may be so intense that I'll like, I mean, it depends on the memory and the situation, right? But like for like a more intense memory I'm coming back to, I'll find that my body like reacts. I start shaking. Like I will actually start shaking. And so I'm writing it, but I'm like knowing that that's happening because I'm returning to it. And I think this to me is the beautiful part of the writing process, because it can be so healing,
Mhm.
you know, because you're returning to it. And I guess the science is that by reliving it, but in the safety of like, you know, your chair and your desk
Yeah.
and like the lights are on and your home, you're starting to process it, right? So your body's
Right.
like, oh, we're actually going to be okay.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
safe now, and you can
Um,
think back on it
yeah.
with a better brain or mind about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It doesn't trigger the same fight or flight as strongly, at least
Right.
Yeah.
necessarily. So that's kind of like my first pass. And when I was doing that, I would find I would have to walk away. Like after I did that, I couldn't like sit there and be like, now I'm going to write for another 2 hours going to some funny
Yeah.
scenes. Like it's not,
Yeah.
you know, it
Yeah, you
would
need
be
a
like,
break.
okay, that was it for today. I'm going to go take a walk. I'm going to do something like that feels good to my body. And that's kind of how I got through a lot of that first pass. And then in terms of taking care of the reader, I found I was actually just doing this morning. I'm revising now, and I would like go back to these passages I wrote, and you know, maybe unsurprisingly, they're like very literal. They're just they're like literally kind of reporting what happened, like, and then this happened, and
From
this
a
happened, and this
distance.
happened.
Mhm.
Yeah, and they're also there's no kind of there's no humor,
Mhm.
none, no humor. I mean, because right, when you're really, there's likely not, very rarely humor in a moment like that, at least that you're going to pull out at
Right.
first. So now that I have distance, both from the thing I'm writing about, but also from that first draft, I'm like infusing these little flecks of humor into it. Like, you know, like I was making fun of how my husband and I like poke at each other, and I'm like, you know, like hashtag this is marriage. Like I'm just like throwing those little things in because
Mhm.
that I see that as a form of taking care of the reader,
Yeah.
because it's like, I get that this is hard to read for you because this was also hard to live through. So
Yeah.
I want to make this I want to make this go down, like sugar coating the pill, you know, like I want to make this go down a little easier, because otherwise, I mean, if I were a reader, I might put down the book, or I might
Mhm.
skim, or I might, right? Because I'm like, this is really heavy, and I can't, like, we take care of ourselves. We're like, I don't want to go there right now.
Yeah.
But if there's like some lightness in there, I think it really helps with that experience. And then for the reader, but I'm finding I can't do that the first pass. I have to come back later
Yeah.
and do that.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking when you were first talking about it, that I think it can be healthy to just let yourself write it.
Me
And
first.
yeah. Wait, did she freeze?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
good?
sorry. I think
Oh, you're good.
I had an
Um,
internet freak out. Okay.
It
back.
happens.
No
But
worries.
yeah, so if you let yourself just kind of get it all out on that first pass, like you're saying, and don't really worry about how it's going to read, right? Because you're going to edit later. Don't worry about, I need to make this beautiful writing, or I need to make this humorous, or anything like that. Like just get it out. And then, like you said, just kind of give yourself a chance to walk away and take that break, and then come back to it at a later time. I think that's a really good first step. I think that is a good tip.
I agree. I like it. It's kind of like adding bumpers, you know,
Yeah.
for people who are not already familiar with that exact trauma. Because maybe if you have really similar trauma, I don't know, maybe it's not as traumatizing. I feel like it would be just equally traumatizing, but you would know how to deal with it kind of. But not everybody has the exact same trauma or the exact same response. So it's kind of like putting up bumpers to help them not go totally off the rails about it, like stay like a little more emotionally safe.
Yeah.
Like protecting them from secondhand trauma, which I do think for people who really get into books, and that's like a lot of readers. I mean, when you really invest in a book, I do think that can happen. I can still think about scenes that I read too young that like kind of haunt me still.
Yeah.
That I
Same.
mean, it's obviously not the same as personal trauma, but it is something I didn't have to experience and I wish I'd been warned about. I don't think it's contributed positively that I've had those images, you know. But so I think if we're referring to that as quote unquote like secondhand trauma, I do think that we talk sometimes about like the responsibility of the writer. I do think there's a responsibility to try and, you know, obviously be honest, and we always want what we write to be absolutely authentic to real life, but also to protect your readers from unnecessary secondhand trauma.
Yeah. And I think a good way to do that is like being upfront about what the content is going to be, like Mary was saying.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to
Yeah.
have this super traumatic scene,
The big
especially
part of it,
early on in the
yeah.
book, you don't have time to kind of foreshadow or kind of hint at it in other ways. It's going to be different from the rest of the vibe of the book. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe let people know about that
It
or
would have been
change
so good to know for that book
the
I just
general
read.
atmosphere.
There
Yeah.
was no
Yeah.
warning at all.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I think
Right.
about Ellen Hopkins, who she writes the books in verse, like Crank, I think is her biggest one.
Mhm.
And I've read a couple of hers and they are so traumatic, but that's like her thing, right? Like you go into those knowing that. So you don't pick those up thinking
Yeah.
they're going to be a light read. And I think that does mentally prepare you. I mean, they're still really tough to get through, but that you're mentally prepared at least. So
Right. It's like my second novel was about a sexual assault and then a trial, like a judicial process at the university about that assault.
yeah.
But it says on the back, like, this is about a sexual
Yeah. You know that
assault
going
and
into
a
it.
judicial process around the sexual assault. So like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
yes, you know it. And if it's a thriller, you know, it's going to be a murder. I mean, I think it's also like, so in my case, it's about the story of 3 miscarriages in a year. And like,
Jeez.
I'm not to the marketing point yet, but like
Mhm.
when I am, that it will be important to me that is forefronted in the marketing, because I'm not trying to like use the second and third miscarriages as like a suspense tool, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
going to be like, let's surprise the reader with more, like that
Yeah.
With more trauma.
would be terrible to do to someone that like,
Yeah.
and like in some ways I can, but that said, I can see someone thinking, well, like if I'm writing something that's true to life, maybe I should do that because that's what it felt like. And it's like, but there are certain pieces of trauma that may feel a certain way as they're happening that you don't, I think like you don't want to recreate for the reader, because
Yeah.
like we don't actually want to traumatize a reader.
Yeah.
Like that's not the goal,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think too, that helps with marketing if you're just upfront about what the book is about, because someone that doesn't want to read about that doesn't want to be traumatized, or even just, you know, read about any kind of trauma like that, if you lie about it or cover it up, then you get the wrong reader. And the people that would be interested in it don't pick it up because they don't think it's going to be something they're interested in. So that's also,
Yeah. And then they might not read anything else that you put out, because like I did with this
Yeah.
author, if I hadn't gotten the bundle, I swear I would never, ever have picked up another book, because I felt totally duped
right.
by the type of content that was in it. I was like, there was not even a smidge of a hint that this was going to be like this. So you also like you alienate existing readers, you alienate future readers. You don't, it's not good for your reputation from a professional perspective. But also, I mean, and we talk about, especially Karissa talks about that a lot, about being honest and not leading people to think your book is about something that it isn't, or trying to hide the stuff that you really should be upfront about if it's in your book, which is definitely important from, it's important from a marketing professional perspective and as you build your career, but also just as being kind to your readers. Well, I can't think of anyone. Would you do that to yourself? Like, can anyone out there be like, oh yeah, I didn't expect this horribly traumatic thing in this book and I loved it? I feel like that is not a common response.
Right.
No, that's right. And I think another tool too can be like, if someone's like, oh, well, this really traumatic thing in my book. Oh no, is my internet going out again?
You're a little
Am I back?
slow for a
Just
second,
a
but you're
little
back
bit
for
laggy,
me.
but yeah, you're back.
Okay, hopefully it's okay. Let me just text my husband really fast to tell him to stop watch streaming if he's streaming.
Get off the internet.
That's me all the time.
Internet is going out.
It was like back when dial-up
Okay.
was a thing and you had to like get off the phone and use the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that what I was gonna say is a good way to give the reader a heads up, like what we're talking about, is by putting it in the marketing, right? Putting it in the back of the book, like then they know what they're getting into. But then when I've said that to a couple of writers before, I've heard like, well, I don't think it's like big enough to go into the back of the book. But if I actually think that's good information, because if it's not big enough to go into the back of the book and it's traumatic, Why is
Does
it
need
even
to be
in
in
there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sort of how I felt about, I mean, I honestly didn't even finish the book. I still want to, but the lessons in chemistry right at the beginning, I was like,
Mhm.
if this is small enough to the rest of the story that it didn't need to go in the marketing, why is this happening on page 18?
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
It's too
like,
big to be a subplot.
yeah. So I think
Exactly.
I think it's actually a helpful tool for writers to use.
I think
Yeah.
so too. And I mean, if it's something that you want, like you want to tell your readers, like this is background, this traumatic thing did happen, but it's not like central to the plot right now. I feel like maybe you could drop in like you could allude to that this has happened, but you don't need to go into it graphically. You don't need to even provide a whole scene for it. You could just allude to this
Yes.
person is a survivor of this type of trauma and move on. And that is great. And that is
Yeah.
relatable. And it also is not as alien. If you do have someone with a similar trauma, now they can relate more versus if you describe this graphic experience that's kind of like what they experienced, but not exactly, you're making them live through a new trauma and compare it to their old trauma. So they're reliving two traumas now. And that's so unnecessary when you could have just, if it's not that important to the plot, it's just kind of background knowledge. You could have just alluded to it. We do talk about that with sex scenes a lot too.
Yeah.
We're like,
Yeah.
unless it's central to the plot, you could just allude to it because
Mhm.
more often than not, like if a reader wants a book with like lots of like, explicit or graphic sex, they're going to go pick up a book that they know has that. If you're just throwing it in there and like someone's not expecting it, like I just feel like, whoa, I didn't know that
Not
was going
prepared.
to be here. I wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah.
That feels
Yes.
private to me. I feel like I stepped into the room and I'm like, oh no, someone should have locked the
Yes.
door.
Yes.
But that's where
Totally.
illusions are so great. They're so powerful for stuff that can be triggering or that stuff that is naturally very graphic. And sure, it's in real life and we want, art to mimic real life, but you can still mimic it accurately with an illusion.
Yeah.
You don't have to step by step go
Yeah.
through the graphic just horribleness of it all. I really wish people would use illusions more, specifically for trauma and also for sex scenes and also for that might be partially my personal taste, but I do think that
Yeah.
it appeals to more readers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
It's having those
sometimes
expectations
violence
in
too.
mind. Oh,
Yeah. And I think that writers tend to be better about being a little bit more vague about violence, but I actually think that that's just because people have more experience with sex and trauma probably than like battlefield violence, like I've never
True.
seen someone stabbed with a sword, so I can't describe it as graphically,
That's true.
Right.
but for occasionally there are some writers who I think go a little over the top with the violent graphic description as well. And if it's not necessary, why do it?
Yeah. I also
Yeah.
think that would help you, it would help prevent you from being re-traumatized by something. If you feel
Mhm.
like, okay, this bad thing happened to me, now I have to include it in every book I write or try to shoehorn it in. You don't need to do that. You can have other things to say. It doesn't have to be this center of your life. You can write about other things. And so I guess just knowing that you have freedom from it in that way, that you don't have to talk about it all the time, and especially not before you're ready. You can just,
Yeah.
you don't
or you
have
don't have to
to.
talk about it in detail, or you could
Yeah.
drop
Mhm.
you could delve into this part of, because trauma is so multifaceted, even like one traumatic event, and there's so many facets of that you could explore. So just like, taking it piece by piece instead of, which is also kind of what it felt like with this book that I just read. And like you were saying, Mary, about like giving your readers like a break. You don't just go from one big trauma to another trauma to another trauma. This book did that. And not only was I not expecting anything like that, and all of it was so graphic, there was no break in this horrible trauma that was happening to these children for like the first half of the book. And it was horrible. I almost didn't finish it. If it wasn't on audiobook and I wasn't like multitasking and not like fully listening, there's no way I ever would have finished it. It was, but yeah. So, I mean, they could have literally just been like, and here's part of a bad thing that happened, and we can just assume the rest of the day was also very, very bad.
Yeah.
And then maybe we have a break, or maybe they would do like and here's what's happening in the future, and then go back to a little more trauma in the past or from a different angle. And then we go back to the future again and break it up a little bit more to give readers a chance to breathe.
Yeah. That's kind of a pacing thing. That's like a pacing skill.
Very much.
I also think, I was just thinking, it actually takes skill to do what we're talking about, because it's not like when you say illusions, like you don't mean that, I mean, I assume you don't mean, I'm sure you don't mean that writers need to like be generic or use generalizations. Like you can allude and it can be beautifully done. Like you can still use specifics. You can still pick specific details that paint a scene or that start to paint a scene. And then what I was also just thinking is this is the beauty of literature. It's why people read, because it engages their imagination, right?
Yeah.
Like we are creating a sketch and they fill in everything else. So really what an illusion is just like that on steroids. Like it's like, let's just like give them like enough that their imagination can fill in the gaps. And like, if you do it well, that will work. Like, and it can feel, I think more satisfying almost, like,
I think so.
I feel like a really beautiful allusion to a sex scene. I feel like I enjoy that more as a reader than like a description of someone biting someone's ear. Like,
well, because it's more romantic because you get to like superimpose what you find romantic over it versus not everyone has the same idea of romance. So sometimes I read these sex scenes and I'm like,
ew,
it's not really my taste. Glad you guys are having a good time. This is not really my vibe. But if they had just alluded, I could have been like, oh, and I bet it was romantic in this way. And I bet he said that and she did that. And it makes it like nice and romantic. But I completely agree. But it's definitely not like alluding to just like be like overly general. Like that's definitely, it's more like a paint by numbers or like a connect the dots. Like you give them the information they need to have an accurate enough picture of what happens, but they can use whatever colors they want. They can connect the dots themselves. You're just not graphically giving them like a pixel, like full, like on like pixel by pixel picture of the scene.
Exactly.
Well, and I think a lot of it comes down to writer, or at least I do. I assume a lot of writers have this fear that you will be unclear, right? You'll be writing and people won't get it. And it's not that you think the reader is dumb. It's just, I mean, maybe you do, but hopefully not. But you think maybe I'm not that good at this. Maybe I need to like overdo it a little bit. And it just takes away from the overall effect. It's, I think, almost always better to imply. And like you said, don't be generic. If there's a sexual assault in it, in the past of the main character or something, don't say, and I was sexually assaulted, right? Because that's not really how I think people would think. But you can have like little triggers in the world of things that remind that character about what happened, and then they trail off, and then you get little details as the story goes on to fill in those gaps. But you don't have to have the graphic scene for readers to get. They will pick up on it. And if you're not sure if you're implying it well enough, that's where like beta readers come in, but you're probably doing a perfectly fine job and you don't need to worry about not being clearly understood.
Right.
I think for like some examples of that, regardless of the type of trauma, whether it's sexual, whether it's violent, whether it's whatever, you can, like Karissa said, like letting like environmental triggers kind of throw off your character for a second because it reminds them of something is a great, beautiful, never outdone way to allude to something that's happened. And it also adds kind of an air of mystery because you can drop it throughout the book. Like you could be like a, breeze came by bringing with it the scent of some men's cologne. And for a second I was back there and I felt my heart stop, and then the breeze shifted and everything was fine again, and then just in that moment you're like, what's that about? What's the men's cologne? What happened? And so the reader gets the intrigue and they get to start building their own kind of story of what happened. So you can imply so much about that. And then if you want to, drop more details later, probably you should, because you're just dropped like a tantalizing mystery in front of your readers. But that's like it's a more gentle way. It's a more natural way. And I think it's a more true to life way too. It's not like someone who has experienced trauma sits there every day and sits there and for hours straight relives the trauma. It's like a trigger, like something happens, like they hear a car screech, they hear a gunshot, and for a second it's like
they're back.
Whoa, okay. And if they have anxiety or panic attacks, maybe there's that, but those you don't really need to go into detail about like for like a bunch of pages either, because it's what it is. It's
love
like an event
that. Yeah. And I think similarly, you can write about a traumatic event itself and lean into what's actually real by having a character hyper focus on a distracting detail that is helping them cope through the experience.
Yeah.
Because that's also true to life, right? Like if something traumatic is happening, the whole point, the definition of trauma is that our brains cannot process it in the moment. So like we tend to escape, go somewhere else, focus on a stain on the wall, there and so you can lean into that. You can do, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, like describe I think in the same way that our brains and bodies protect us from it in the moment, we can lean into that to also protect the reader from it. And it will ring true because that's how humans are, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually more true to life than trying to graphically step by step, relive this trauma for your reader. Because also, two people in the same traumatic situation could have a very different experience of it based on, how are they coping? What was their past experience before this? There's so many things that can change the nature, like the graphic nature of a, traumatic event or traumatic events, where it just makes it's impossible to relate to everybody who has the trauma. And if they haven't had trauma, then you're traumatizing them for the first time for no reason, which is unnecessary. But and also the illusions can be so poetic, like you said, like what did they pick to focus on? Do they have positive associations with that or negative later? There's just so much poetry and healing, I think, that you can use, like that you can work into the story much more naturally. And
it will help you as you're writing.
And it helps
have
you
that
too.
anger too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's how, I could think about like one of the last books that I refinished writing. There's definitely some like personal, like trauma informed aspects of it. And when I first wrote it many years ago, because I did a big rewrite of it, I didn't know that when I wrote it. It just kind of happened because that's what happens, especially when you process through writing. So a lot of writers will look back and go, oh, I was going through that at the time. I didn't realize. But then you can see, like, as you write the story, and I went back and rewrote it, so hopefully with more skill because it was years later, but I was able to use like symbols and illusion in a way where you could kind of see this character kind of coming out of this trauma and getting to this place of like healing and acceptance and kind of being beyond it in a sense that she had never been before. And if I had been like really graphic about this specific trauma she was enduring, even as the book was going on, I think that's all people would have been focused on, because it would have haunted them. It would have stuck with them for the entire book, and it would have ended and they would have been like me talking about that book I just read, where they're like, all I can think about is how graphic and horrible that trauma was, instead of being like, bad things definitely happened. They were very serious. I could feel it really deep. I had my own imagination to lean on. And then I was also able to see this character come out of it on the other side. It just takes all of the focus onto the trauma instead of the process of healing.
Yes, I love that way of putting it.
Good. I was going to ask, do you guys think you have to be, I guess you're never really fully over a trauma, but do you think as a writer you should be mostly through it, or do you think writing within it is sometimes a good idea?
I have such strong feelings on this.
Okay, good. Tell us.
So because I had heard before, write from your scars, not from your wounds, like as if, and it sounds so wise. And I could not disagree more, because I think I heal through writing. And I think a lot of writers heal through writing. And I'm not saying I'm not saying write from within it and then go to try to publish it tomorrow. Like publicly different, right? I heal through writing more than through anything else. So like if I weren't going to let myself write until I felt like I had healed, it would take me longer to heal, to get there, because that's how I do it.
I
like
agree.
Looking for those it's right. That's part of like, I don't know why it works like that, but that it helps my brain heal from it.
I think so. I agree. It's part of like the stitching it back together process. You have a cut and you're stitching it back together. And sometimes that means therapy. For writers, it usually also means writing is kind of a part of that process. Generally time, but why would you wait till it's completely healed and then rip it back open? That
Yeah.
is,
That's
That's true
another
too.
good point.
that's a little bit, that's rough.
Brutal.
Yeah,
That's
it's really
brutal.
brutal. It puts you through it again. And also it'll never be quite the same as it was when you were going through it. Like when I wrote that book, a lot of hard stuff was happening. So it's very,
Yeah.
what the trauma that's in it is very real and comes from a very immediate place, which is great because it was happening in a very immediate sense to the character.
Mhm.
Now, years later, I can go back, and I'm actually very glad it was not published then. And I can, you make it a little bit more artful. But at the time, I needed that to heal. And now going back, mostly healed later, and healing is obviously an ongoing process, but mostly
Yeah.
healed from it later, I can go back and make it a little more artful. But it wouldn't be the same as if I tried to write the same character now, then it would be different. It would be a character that's kind of already at my place of healing, as versus a character who is in the midst of the trauma.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love that point about having to reopen it later when you might actually, I mean, if you're to the point where it truly is no longer a wound, it's a scar,
Mhm.
it's very possible you just want to move on from that. Like you
Yeah.
don't want to, like, you may return to it for the sake of your writing. Like,
Mhm.
oh, this would really flesh out this character if I went back to this thing that I know. But like, I don't, nonfiction, especially that I'm writing it to heal. That is a major
Yeah.
part of the motivation. So if
Yep.
I didn't have that, I don't think I would be interested. It would be like
Yeah.
that. I'd rather write something else. Like
Yeah.
I'd rather write romance, like a place I want to spend my time,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be an escape too. So if you're dealing with trauma, you can't. I've never, in the middle of a horribly traumatic situation, been like, you know what? I could really use a beach vacation right now. Like that's just a different headspace to be in,
Space.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yes.
just like, you're not ready, to escape because you're still dealing with important things that are going on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you have to, we also say a lot as writers, take inspiration when it comes. And I think that's absolutely true. Not that I want to call trauma inspiration, but it is sometimes the instigation that gets us writing. So take the instigation when you get it too, don't like force yourself to write if you're like, this traumatic thing's happening and maybe I can use this as an opportunity to inform my writing, but I don't really want to delve into it. Like, don't force yourself to do that. That's
Yeah.
so unnecessary. That's just going to hurt yourself. But if you, process through writing, and you think that that would be helpful, or it's making you feel better, or just helping you put your thoughts and feelings about what happened in order, then go for it. I mean, that can be great instigation. And you may or may not ever use that in a book that gets published. And that's okay too, because all writing is good. All writing is contributing to your skills as a writer, but also like in just a very like healing sense, most writers, there's so much more to writing than telling someone a story or getting published or making a name for yourself. It is so personal and so important. Even if you don't ever do anything with it, I don't think any writing is wasted writing. So if you need to process trauma while you're in trauma and then you're like, oh, but I'll never be able to use it, that is absolutely okay. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but it's still absolutely worth doing.
Yeah, the point can be just for you, not for your career
Yeah.
or readers. It can be both, but first and
Yeah.
foremost, I guess it should be for you. So
Yeah, that's really important. I agree. Can I share also one thought for people who are returning to something that they've moved on
Yes.
from?
Yes.
Because I do have a thought on that as well. Because I know it can be sometimes for exactly the reason we're talking about. If you've healed from it and you've moved on, like, or like you said, healing's an ongoing process. But let's say like there is some returning to it that's necessary when you're going to go, and like the point that it's daunting, like you're sort of putting it off because you don't want to go there. One thing that I think can be really helpful is deciding what you're going to write, like the scope of it, and then setting aside the time and place you're going to do it, and then it's going to be done. So like really cordoning off the boundaries of it, and then giving yourself that gift of like, yeah, I'm not going to work on this for 3 days. Like I'm going to, like the sexual assault scene in my novel, I decided I knew I had to write it. I was putting it off. I was like, this is going to be atrocious to write, of course. I decided the morning I was going to write it, the place I was going to write it, like in a coffee shop, because that felt like extremely neutral and safe. Like you're literally, people are like buying lattes next to you, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like in a coffee shop on this morning, and like, I'm going to write it this morning. I'm done this morning. Like by lunchtime, this thing will be done. And of course, like later there will be revision, but like, I'm not going to keep working on it after that. And that really made it more manageable, because it, you know, it was hard to write, but it was also like, okay, like I did that. It took 2 hours. I'm like, got to shake it off in this coffee shop, and now I'm going to get a sandwich and move on with my day.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So you
I
don't
think
have
that
to
can
live
be
in
helpful.
it, you know, like indefinitely, where you're like, ooh, when am I going to get to this scene that I have to write? Which is stressful in just a myriad of ways. I do hate that when I know that there's a scene, even when it's not like a traumatic scene, there's just a scene coming up that I'm like, I'm putting off and putting off because I know it's going to be really hard. And then I just live with that dread just the whole time, instead of just being like, okay, I'm going to go sit in this coffee shop for 2 hours and write this scene, and I'll be done with it. And then you can move on. You don't have to worry. And that's where compartmentalization, super useful, I think, from a, you know, structuring your story. And yes, there can be over compartmentalization in trauma. That is true, but it's not a bad thing. The reason that your brain tends to compartmentalize things with trauma is because it's protecting you, so you don't have to deal with all of it at once. And so that's a very, very good tool to use, especially if you're writing something traumatic, or just something that you don't really, you know, it's something that's really hard and you're putting off. But especially for something, you know, traumatic, really overly emotional, you know, be like, I'm going to think about this for XYZ hours today. Maybe I'll plot it out, and then tomorrow I'm going to write it and it'll be done. And then you can kind of just, until you go back through the next edit, you don't have to think about it again. And you shouldn't have to think about it on the same deep level as the first time that you
revisions are
exactly.
Yeah.
You can do
never
more
as
of the
deep into
editorial
it.
arm's distance. Like I'm looking at this for craft.
Exactly, which is also compartmentalization, but that's just to be, that's just because it's practical and effective.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think definitely setting boundaries, like every therapist, like one of the first things that they'll tell you after some kind of trauma is that you need to set some kind of boundary or other, you know, and it's because they're super useful tools. And that's kind of what we're doing when we're setting up bumpers around, you know, the trauma that we write to protect our readers. We're kind of setting up these boundaries for the readers because we want to take care of them. And you need to set boundaries for yourself as the writer to take care of yourself mentally, which is, I mean, I think exactly what you're talking about. And I think that's going to a public place like a coffee shop. That's a great idea. At first I was like, yeah, I guess you could, like, you know, rent a cabin and be like, I'm going to go on a little writing retreat and fix this. And I'm like, being alone in a cabin by myself, I relived the worst trauma of my life. Maybe that's a horrible idea, but going to a crowded coffee shop, or maybe if coffee shops make you anxious, there's, you know, you could go to a public library or something, but like, you know, find a place where you feel safe and set a time, and you know that you don't have to deal with it again after that time. Their boundaries, they're so healthy. They are so helpful. If you have never mastered boundaries, not that I've mastered them, but Lordy Beasley, I love a good boundary. It's survival.
Yeah. And I find, I actually find writing about traumatic things in extremely like innocuous public places to be really grounding. Like I've been revising my memoir at my son's gymnastics camp under the guise of, like, literally until we were just having this conversation, I had been telling myself I was doing it because he doesn't want me to leave, but he doesn't want me to leave a lot of times, and I leave anyway. So like, I'm like, he doesn't want me to leave, so I just need to sit in this gymnastics gym with a bunch of 5-year-olds and write. And I'm like, no, it's because that it's like you're in this thing and it's like really heavy or hard, and then you look up and like life is moving on anyway, and like a kid is doing a somersault. Like it really helps with the sort of like, no, we're safe. Like it brings you back.
Yeah. It's grounding. It prevents you from going in too deep, which I think might be, for writers, the biggest risk of letting trauma inform your writing, because I think, I mean, we can probably all think of times when we've gone in so deep to your book that then you all of a sudden, like, someone speaks to you and you're like, I forgot you existed. Like, I forgot anything. Real. Yeah, I forgot that this wasn't real. And that's not really something that you want to do with trauma. I don't know that that's a very healing thing to do with trauma. I'd be curious to hear what a therapist would say about that. Typically that's considered like a flashback or dissociation. So I think maybe
Yeah.
doing it somewhere that's public and really active around you. So there's enough distraction that it keeps you from wading in too deep where you can't get back out. To kind
Yeah.
of like keep you in the shallows is
Yeah.
probably a really good idea.
Yeah. I have found it to be. And in terms of the dissociation thought, I've also found that like it's been so important to pay attention to what my body is doing. Like a lot of my memoir is actually about dissociating from my body historically, but like I would find in the past, it would be like, I don't know when my heart's racing. Like, why am I so anxious? And it's like,
Yeah.
now I understand it, like, because your body is returning to the scene of what happened. Like,
Yeah.
and even if mentally you're like, but I've moved on, that doesn't mean your body has, like,
Yeah.
your body's on a different, it's like not doing what your brain's doing always. Like, you may
Yeah.
think it is, but I don't know, maybe not. That's not like the scientific way of putting it, right? But like,
No, that
there's
makes
like
sense
your
though.
body
but
is on
it's
its own
true.
timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think like basically acknowledging that is important, like not being like, I need to just push through if you're like your heart's rate or something, right?
Yeah.
Being like, okay, I'm having this, I don't necessarily need to do anything about it, but I'm going to acknowledge it. And maybe I do need to do something about it,
Yeah.
like I said, maybe I do need to like go on a walk or like get a blanket or like,
Yeah.
something heavy can be
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah, exactly. My husband has PTSD from lots of things, but military service as well. So like, thunder will sometimes be really rough for him.
Yeah.
But it's not like he's always like, oh, thunder. Oh, that's why my heart's racing. He'll just stand up and go, my heart's racing. I need to go on a walk, or I need to take a shower, or I need to, just because his body,
Do
I mean, and
something
he
else.
knows in his head, and he's gone through therapy, like it's not that like his thought
Yeah.
process about it hasn't healed. It's that his body, had basically for survival trained itself to really quickly react in a certain way. And so,
Mhm.
and that can happen so fast. It's not like it has to be like a repeated incident. Like you can go through a
Mhm.
trauma once and your body learns in that moment that this is how they survive. And that's what it's going to keep doing for a very long time.
Mhm.
I don't, and it's weird because you can totally heal in your head and then something, that trigger happens. You smell
Yeah.
someone's cologne, you hear
Yeah.
thunder, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden your body just goes back to that moment. And I do think it's probably a good idea to take a break, and also to spend some time, if you haven't like already, before you sit down to write about something traumatic, know what will snap you out of it. If it's being in a public place and activity
Mm.
around you, that's good. If you're someone who needs to go kind of be by yourself, you need to be quiet, you need to be outside in fresh air, then
Mhm.
make sure that when you sit down to write, you have access to that escape. If you need
Mhm.
to take a shower, sometimes getting in the water can make a big difference. So right by the pool or right by the shower, just make sure you
Yeah.
have access to the coping skills that can snap you out of it. Not because you aren't like strong enough, but because your body is doing its own thing. It's trying to take care of you. It's
Mhm.
not perfect.
Mhm.
But definitely give yourself access to what you need to take care of yourself when you're going to be writing traumatic scenes, which is also, if you do this whole boundaries thing and you plan in advance, like Mary's saying, when you're going to write this really hard scene, it's a lot easier to make sure you have access to the things that make you
Yeah.
feel better. If you just kind of go
Yeah.
into it and you're not planning, all of a sudden you're writing about trauma and you have a panic attack and you are somewhere where you can't do anything about it, that sucks and it could have been avoided. So I think that all of this just goes back to me thinking, wow, I should never write about trauma again without planning it out. It could be such a less, the chance of re-traumatizing yourself, I feel like drops so much more if you prepare yourself. You plan it out, you prepare where you're going to go, how long
Yeah.
you're going to do it for, what are you going to do if your body starts, shaking, or you're having a hard time breathing, heart racing, whatever. If you start dissociating, what can you do?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think everything we're talking about is really like can be framed as treating it different from the rest of your writing process. Like this isn't going to
Yeah.
look exactly the same. And like
Mm.
that I think going into it with that mindset is important. Like it will take a different kind of planning. You'll probably write at a different pace. Like you may, if you're usually write 4 hours a day, like you might write 20 minutes and be done for the day. Like you just, you want to be prepared for it to look different, and not because you're doing anything wrong as a writer, and not because you have like lost your lost your woo or whatever as a writer. Like it's just different. It's the kind of material that it brings in these different parts of our life history and our brains and bodies. And so like we just got to approach it differently. And that's going to be true for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It's when you play with like, you know, dangerous stuff, you wear protective gear. So if you're going to play with something dangerous, maybe give yourself some protection, you know, wear oven mitts, go be in public, whatever it takes. I do totally agree that was kind of, I was thinking about this whole time, like how different the process for writing from trauma is than normal writing. Because it really is not, these are not things that you take into consideration or need to take into consideration for normal writing. It is completely different. It is just so interesting that this is not something I think writers talk about a lot, maybe because it just doesn't come up in conversation. But it feels very important because it is so different. It's not like they teach you this in school. This is not part of the writing process.
Right.
It's not like your therapist tells you this either. But I do think this is like, it's very, very different, the process that you need to go to protect yourself and to protect your readers, and to, you know, do the diligence that your story deserves too, because you always want to do what's best for your story as well. It is. It's completely different.
Yeah, we should talk about it more openly. Especially like on both fronts, on the caring for the writer self front, like we have been for the last few minutes, but also the caring for the reader front. I think when I think of there's an editor in my program, and well, there are a couple of editors who edit people's work in the program that I run. And this has only happened once, but once one of them had to reach out to me and say that someone's draft had such gratuitous violence that she, like, it was really upsetting her to read it. Like, I don't think she used the word traumatizing, but like it's all the same. It's like, it like, and it was really interesting because I was like, oh, we have a responsibility to anyone who reads, especially someone who's reading because it's their job, like, so they have to do it, like, not to do that. So that then it becomes, it's on the writer, like that's the writer's responsibility to measure, like, what is gratuitous, like what is excessive and unnecessary, what is too graphic. And like in this, I mean, to this writer's credit, like I think that's where you figure this out, right? Is in the beta reading process. And it, like, this was still an early draft, and like he was still figuring out what he was calibrating still. But I just think it speaks to the importance of like bringing conscious attention to that. And not like carefully considering as a writer, if this is something traumatic, how is it coming across? And is it going to be upsetting to a reader? And if so, is there a way I could mitigate that? And is that worth the cost to the story?
I think that that's important. Like you said, I think that there's very little excuse for books to get all the way to market with like overly, you know, gratuitous or graphic, you know, trauma or violence or whatever, because it does go through so many, you know, review processes for the most part. Maybe self-published sometimes doesn't, but for the most part, there's so many places that you could catch it. And I think that's kind of on all of us as writers to be willing to accept feedback. When I was working as an editor, had a client whose book was problematic, and there was a myriad of problems. Some of it was just way too graphic, lots of stuff. It was a mess in a myriad of ways. But I was still, you know, happy to work with them, but I had to say, hey, this is probably not going to fly. Here are some ways that you could still get your message across in a more palatable way, maybe in a more responsible way. And he did not like it. And I did
Less is
not
more.
continue working with him, which was unfortunate because there were good parts of his story. He could have done something, you know, good with his story, but he did not take the feedback. And I know that sometimes feedback stings, but especially if it's something that has to do with trauma or something being too graphic, I think we have to take that kind of feedback particularly seriously, because that's something that you actually can do damage if you don't listen. You know, if your editor says, hey, replace this word here, I'll take out this scene here, you know, for the most part, that's not going to, you know, it's not maybe going to make your story better or worse, but it might not hurt your readers. But if you have an editor or a beta reader saying, hey, I think this is too graphic. Hey, I think this is too much. Hey, this is kind of traumatizing. Maybe you want to, you know, rework this somehow. I think that's the kind of feedback it's really not negotiable. Like, you need to look at it. You need to see if you can try something different if that's the feedback that you're getting.
Yeah. And you can take a bunch of different opinions if you need to. Like, one person might say, this is just too much for me. I can't work with this, or I can't read this. But if everyone you're giving the book to is saying the same thing, then
you definitely can't ignore it.
Take that seriously. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that either of y'all want to share on this topic?
No.
I guess one more thing.
Okay, go for it.
No, my last thought is basically, I think there is a difference too between being graphic in a way that is like, okay, let's take consensual, a romantic consensual sex situation, for example. Like, reasonable people can disagree on that, right? So like, if a reader's like, I don't like the ear stuff, the ear nibbling, or whatever. And as the author, you're like, well, I want to keep the ear nibbling in. That, like, that's different than what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not going to traumatize someone, probably.
This is something that could do damage, or just be, you know, a little, like, ruffle someone's feathers if they're like pearl clutching, you know, like, there's a difference between those two.
There's a big difference. Exactly. And we just talk about like graphic, we always end up bringing up sex when we talk about graphic scenes, because I think a lot of sex scenes would just be better if they weren't as graphic for that exact reason. But it's definitely different with trauma. Like, if you want to write a sex scene and there's someone's telling you it's too graphic, but it's consensual, like, okay, then do it. Like, if you don't want to take feedback on that, it's not going to hurt your reader.
Right.
It might not be best, or it might be. It's more of a preference thing at that point, but it's not going to hurt your readers. But if it's something traumatic, do something about it. If you're getting feedback that this is too much, or the way that you've approached it is too much, because that actually can damage your readers. There's definitely, a big difference between like sex scenes and even violence to a degree, because we're more used to it. But certain types of trauma are just, you can't play with it. It's like playing with dynamite. It's like playing with hot coals. You do have to be careful. You can get hurt. You could hurt your readers. So with that kind of stuff, it's not a preference that you need to be careful. Like we sometimes say with like, oh, we think sex scenes are better when people allude to whatever. It's not a preference. It's just a fact that when you're writing with trauma, you need to be careful for yourself and with others.
It's a responsibility.
You want to be effective, but not like harmful. I would think you wouldn't want to do that. So
it's a non-negotiable. Like, you know, sex scenes, I know what I like and what I don't like, but writing with trauma, it's non-negotiable that you need to be aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and take feedback, and, you know, make sure you're doing right by your readers, and by yourself.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. That was the last thing I wanted to bring up.
Oh, that's good.
That's a good point. Definitely a good point. Well, now we usually go around and we do writing updates. I will start with Karissa, because she usually has something interesting.
I do. Well, I have like.
Do you have any writing updates?
I have.
Actually, I know you have it.
I do. I have like a pseudo good news. I got a request for my full manuscript from an agent. So that was pretty cool.
That's great.
That always feels great.
Yay.
So I mean, it's my Lord of the Flies remix. But have I called it that in here? That's what I call it in my head.
That's what you call it all the time.
That's a really good way of describing it. That's really
That's what it is.
I like it.
You do always call it a remix, which cracks me up. But I'm like, you're not like retelling, not like inspired by or based on. You're like, remix.
I love it. I love it. It's very 90s.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. It's good.
So yeah, I'm excited. And the agent that requested it specifically had said she likes classic retellings. And so she was just like one of the prime suspects where I was like, yeah, I think you might actually really like this.
Oh, that's so nice when your research
yeah.
actually pays off.
So
nice.
that was really fun.
Yes.
It was like a really easy letter to write because I could just say like, hey, you like classic retellings, here's this. So it was really fun. But
That's
I'm excited
great.
about that. I mean, you know, it could still fall through. It's happened, but it's out there. So
yeah,
I'm excited.
Well, it's always one step closer. It feels really good.
Exactly.
It's very validating.
Yeah, I'm like, okay,
it's
so
affirmation.
I feel like, yeah, my query letter's good. My opening pages are probably good. Like, you know, not perfect maybe, but they're working at least. So
that's awesome. I love that. Well, Mary, you said
And
you worked on your
usually
memoir.
once
Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think
You're
my
good.
internet's doing the thing
go
again.
for it.
I was
No
just gonna say,
worries.
usually when you get the full manuscript request, no matter what, you will get some piece of feedback. That
Exactly.
would be helpful.
Yes.
And that's nice.
So
it's so
yeah, that's true.
Yes, I am working on revising my memoir, and my happy writing news is that, I mean, I had set it aside for like 3 months, which is pretty long for me. I don't usually set something aside that long, but because we moved, that's why. So I came back to it just this week, and it was that I was like, this is not terrible. You know, it was like that feeling where like, okay, this is workable. So like,
yeah, this will be good.
I love that feeling.
It is a good, it's like, it's not like what am I back?
Wait, yeah, we lost you for a second. I think you'll have to repeat that last sentence.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, I was just saying workable is a very good thing for me when I come back to revise. Am I gone again? Okay.
Yeah. No, you're good. It was just a little laggy, but we got you that time.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally, completely agree. It's nice when you go back to something and you're like, this isn't garbage. Oh my gosh, I still like it 3 months later. It's so
amazing. Yeah.
That's so nice.
And you're like, I can fix it. Like, it's not, it's almost like coming across like a piece of very workable furniture at like a yard sale or something. You're like, oh, I can make this thing work. You
It's
know?
not perfect yet, but it is in good shape for me to make it perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
Good bones.
Good bones.
Good bones. I love that. That's exciting. Well, I am still happy to say I'm on track, which has been, so you had a reading slump for a while. I had such a writing slump where I was just like, still no updates, everybody. I'm trash. So I am still working on my book. Last time I talked to y'all, I set a goal that I would have the animal companion for my character worked out because I usually hate that thing, but I feel like this character needs one. And so I finally worked that out. I picked a grackle if anyone is interested. So that's
a grackle.
It is it's kind of like a crow or a raven. They're like, there's a lot of them in Texas. They're the ones that always look really angry.
Okay, cool.
Super angry all the time. But you see a blackbird with the yellow, furious looking eyes. That's a grackle.
Okay.
So I picked a grackle, and they're kind of cool. They kind of look like a raven or a crow, but they have a dumb name, and I think it's fun.
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like my last idea was like an armadillo, and I was like, I can't do it.
I still think you should set an armadillo loose in the castle. Just that should be a scene at some point.
Very funny.
Yeah, I might try to like sneak it in. I just hate like cheesy, like I hate talking animal movies. Like I just and we're getting into that realm of like animal goofiness if I put an armadillo in. So I'm like, maybe there'll be like an armadillo in like the seed storage area or something. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'll work an armadillo in there somewhere. But I did that, and I said I was going to write the first 2 pages, which seemed like a very tiny goal because I love to overachieve. So if I set little goals for myself, I'll overachieve them.
That's the key.
And actually, exactly. And I actually did. I finished the outline, picked the animal character, and his name is Gerald, by the way. If anyone is interested, it's Gerald the Grackle. And and I finished my whole first chapter. And it feels
Yay.
amazing. It's been so long and I still
Yay.
like the idea. I still think I can get I think I'll have the whole book finished by the end of the year. And then,
Mhm.
and again, in the theme of remixes, this is kind of a Cinderella remix. And I have
Yeah.
established the aesthetic. It's kind of like Southern Gothic Victorian Cinderella, if that makes sense. Which
Cool.
is it's
Nice.
very weird. And I did it again where I picked something really zany and hard to describe, which means it's impossible to query because that's my
Woo.
favorite thing to do, apparently. So I'm still trying to pin down how I'm going to kind of sell that idea
Mhm.
later, but we'll see how the story evolves. But I'm very proud of myself. And I guess now I have to set another goal. I will have, I really want to still be able to overachieve. I will have 2 more chapters written. I think I can overachieve that.
Oh, all
I
right,
will try to
cool.
have 2 more chapters written by our next episode, which is plenty of time.
It is.
I was so bad for so long, but I kept saying, because my life really was insane. I had so many jobs at once. I kept being like, life really is not, I don't have time. And everyone's like, it's just an excuse. And I'm like, I mean, usually I would agree, but I really don't know how to
Not
make
this
time
time.
right now.
Yeah,
But
sometimes it's not.
sometimes it's not, like you were saying, like you were moving. I was like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like sometimes you can't. And I was in the middle of trying to like prep the farm so that everything on the farm would be taken care of when I am too pregnant to do it. And it's, 105 degrees outside and I can't go outside for more than 10 minutes. I couldn't before I was pregnant. I
Mm.
don't, it's horrible out there.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I was just swamped with that and trying to preserve all the veggies that were going to go bad. And anyways, now I only have one job. It's amazing. All of the like emergency farm like prep stuff is all done. And look at me, I am writing. So it makes me feel a little more valid. Like maybe it wasn't all excuses. Maybe there was some validity before. But I'm very proud of myself. And let's just all welcome Gerald the Grackle to the scene. I'm very proud of Gerald.
I'm excited to meet him. I love it.
He's angry.
I like Southern Gothic Cinderella too. That's a
Yeah.
pretty good descriptor, I think. Yeah.
It's a little different. I'm still kind of working out if it's going to be like, this is like kind of like a dystopian future scenario, or if this is like I don't know. I'm having a very hard time with like pinning down some aspects of it, which is, I feel like this is always what happens with my setting. And then a few years later, I have a really good idea for like fixing it. And I'm like, I don't want to take years to figure out, like to really nail down the setting.
Right.
Because I'm going for like an aesthetic here. I want the Southern Gothic aesthetic and it's going to be fall soon. And so I know I'm going to want like a bunch of like fall elements in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyways, very excited. And it's just so good to be able to tell people that, yeah, I actually did write something.
You're writing again. Yay.
Yeah, it's amazing. Anyway, so that's my writing update. But Mary, do you want to tell people what you're up to, how they can connect with you, all that good stuff?
Sure. So they can just check out, well, my website is my name, which is Mary Adkins with a D, like dog, maryadkinswriter.com. Not maryadkins.com. That belongs to
That's
someone
different.
else who has up a
Different
GoDaddy
person.
site, so you will not
Oh.
see anything. But maryadkinswriter.com. Yeah, and they can find my books there. They can find a link to, I have like a YouTube series that they can learn about my program. All the stuff is there on the website.
Yay.
Cool.
And you have 2 other podcasts. I don't know if you said that or not because we cut out for a second, but
Yes, only one of them is active. It's called the First Draft Club, and it's just me solo sharing writing thoughts and tips, and they're all really short. They're like 15 minutes long.
very enjoyable.
So you can check out the
writers.
First Draft Club.
Go check them out. I just listened to your episode on like the 3 things to know about literary agents. And I was thinking,
Oh,
I'm
yay.
going to know all of this because I've been querying for years. And I was like, oh,
Oh, good.
New things.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad
So
it was
y'all go
helpful.
check it out. Yeah. And they're totally short, like totally like helpful. It's nice. It's like a little boost of inspiration to keep going. And are you on social media at all?
I am on Instagram. It's just
Okay.
Adkins Mary is my handle. And mostly that's just pictures of my kids. So don't expect any writing
Aw.
goodness there really, but you'll see my family.
No worries. Well, Writers, go now. Go check out the Book Incubator. Go check out her writing course if you're someone who struggles to finish your book, because I was just looking at it. I was like, this looks great. So go check it out. Go follow Mary. Definitely follow her podcast. And for us, follow us on social media. We are the Scripturient Society. We're on Instagram, TikTok. We are there to get you through your writing week and make you feel better about yourself, especially when we fail. And I'm trying to think what else. If you guys have episode suggestions, you guys can reach out to us at contact@storysirenstudio.com. That's our production company. And leave us a review below if you liked this episode. And how could you not? Hopefully we didn't re-traumatize you. Yeah, but that's all we've got. So until next week, keep writing.
And we'll see you on the next page.